What is up, everybody? Welcome to the God's Heart, Your Part podcast. I am so excited that you are tuning in. Thank you so much. A couple quick things before we get into it. First off, if there are any specific things you want to hear talked about on the podcast, would you let us know? Reach out to us on Instagram at God's Heart, Your Part podcast. If you'd also like access to exclusive content, we got that for you on our Patreon, so check that out. It'll be well worth your time. Without further ado, let's dive in and let's learn from today's episode together. Well, welcome back to the podcast, everybody, where we are all about equipping and inspiring the next generation to be all that God has called them to be. I am so honored to have today's guest on. He is somebody who has greatly, from a distance, this is my first time talking with him, but through a screen, impacted my ministry as I was growing up. And so I'm honored to speak with him today. He is a coach, an author, a speaker, a communicator. He's kind of everything. And so I'm so excited to have the incredible leader, Wade Joye, with us today. If you want to put a clap in the comments, go ahead and do that for Wade. Wade,
Thanks,
it's
Brandon.
so good to have you, man.
Man, I'm
Yeah.
honored to be here. Thanks for inviting me and giving me the chance just to get to know you and chat for a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. So appreciate your time. And so I kind of gave a very high level. You kind of do it all, man. You're kind of all over the place and you got your hand in everything. So that's my vantage point. But tell everybody about yourself. Who is Wade Joye?
Yeah, I am a husband of 18 years to my amazing wife, Ferris. We have 3 daughters, so I'm a girl dad. So I have twin girls that are 15, and then my youngest daughter is 11. And so I love being a dad. I love being a husband. I love my family.
Yeah.
We live in Charlotte, North Carolina. We were on staff at a church called Elevation Church from 2007 to 2021. I was able to serve as the worship pastor there. And over the last 2 years, I stepped away from staff. We still attend the church, but now I'm passionate about helping mentor and disciple and coach young leaders. I've done a lot of working with worship leaders and pastors over the last 2 years, and now I'm starting to work with just more kingdom-minded leaders in general, learning how we keep a healthy soul in ministry and in life and leadership. And God did a lot to take me through a period of transformation in the middle of a really high stress, high pressure job for so long that I learned that I was helping other people, but I was no longer like leading myself in a healthy way. And so God took me on a period of transformation that I'm excited to help lead other people on as well.
Wow, that's amazing. I'd be curious to hear, because this podcast, like I said, it's geared towards young emerging leaders. And I think if we could even just play off of what you just said there for a minute, I think it is really easy, especially if you're coming up in the church. You obviously want to serve, you want to pour out, but I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen, where while that's very healthy and that's a very great heart posture to have, if you become so consumed with serving and not seeking him, it can become unhealthy and destructive in a lot of ways. So I would be curious to you kind of teased it a little bit, but if you had to speak to that for young emerging leaders and that heart, which is good, like what would you encourage them with? What does it look like to walk in that health while pursuing that?
Yeah. So first of all, I love the local church. And I've spent the majority of my life helping serve in the local church, and I want to do that for the rest of my life, even if the seat looks a little different. I think sometimes we blame the church for our own unhealth when it's really our inability to lead ourselves and to take ownership of our spiritual life and our discipleship. And so I would say, there were different seasons of my time at the church where I felt healthier than others. And there was, God changed my life being a part of Elevation Church. I got to see so many people's lives changed. I got to help pastor an incredible worship team, but it's a fast pace, it's a growing church. We were all just figuring it out We had never led a church that size or a worship ministry that size. And at the same time, I was having my 3 daughters who all have different special needs. So my twin daughters were born 3 months premature. We were told that they wouldn't survive. One of them had a grade 4 brain bleed. They said she would never walk or talk, and they told us to take her off life support, which we obviously didn't do that. And my twins are amazing miracles. And then 4 years later, we had our 3rd daughter, and she was diagnosed with something called cystic fibrosis. So we were navigating a lot of just really hard challenges at home, as well as, challenges that are just part of being in ministry and caring for people and walking with people. And so somewhere along the way, I realized that, I'll put it this way. I tell you the story that kind of encapsulates it. This was 2020, the month of June, and nobody was doing great in 2020, but but I remember it was in June, and it had just been such a stressful couple of months. We were worried about Sydney's cystic fibrosis with COVID because that's a lung condition that she has. And then we were trying to figure out how to do church. And I had just been running so hard for so long. I just felt drained. And I remember us sitting on our back porch, and I was my family was in the background because it was our twins' birthday, and I had a smile on my face. But on the inside, I was just having this conversation with God. And I was like, Lord, I preach about people having abundant life in you. I believe that there's life and there's hope and there's joy. But right now, I don't feel any of that. I just feel empty. Wow. I feel dry. I don't feel like I hear your voice as clearly as I used to. And what I felt like the Lord said to me in that moment was, well, you're not creating the spaces in your life through discipline for me to do the healing that I want to do in your life. And as I stepped back and I looked at my life, I realized that since I grew up in the church, that I had run away from what I thought was legalism. And in doing so, I had run away from discipline, and those two are not the same thing.
Wow.
Because legalism is trying to prove something to yourself, to someone else, to prove that you're worthy, that you have it all together, that you're trying to earn something. Discipline is just creating space for what's most important in your life. And I realized that I was going to the Bible to check off my quiet time off the list, or I was, trying to get something to teach. I wasn't exercising the way I used to or eating well. And so I was looking at my life, and I just saw all these small changes that I could start making. So it wasn't like I had this dramatic turnaround in that moment, but I started making small change after small change, not just spiritually, but physically, emotionally, just all kind of stuff. And I started diving into prayer like never before, listening prayer, contemplative prayer. God gave me a new hunger for the word in that season and a new hunger for community. And I started just to really incorporate some spiritual practices into my life, to the point to where my last year at Elevation, it wasn't like anything slowed down, but I was probably the healthiest I ever was in ministry in that year, because I finally took ownership of my own spiritual well-being, my own prayer life, my presence around my family and my kids. And I couldn't blame. Now, sometimes there are destructive scenarios and environments you need to remove yourself from. This wasn't one of those things. But I finally stopped blaming the stress or the pressure. And I just realized, okay, I can control the things in my life that I can control. And let's start with that and surrendering those to God. And so, that was a journey that the Lord took me on that year. And as I was in that journey is when my heart was finally open to hear him say, okay, now are you willing to trust me to take a step out of what's comfortable at the church and into this whole unknown new faith journey? So I guess to really answer your question more succinctly, I would say that I would encourage young emerging leaders to establish, number one, be very clear about your priorities, and then
Hmm.
establish rhythms and disciplines that support that and that align with that.
Wow.
Um, and then that lets you have a healthy soul and a healthy heart so
Yeah.
that you can serve well and you have something to pour out to other people. And if I had to boil those disciplines down to one thing, I
Yeah.
would say passionate about prayer and hearing the voice of God.
Wow.
Start there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, wait, that's so good. That is so real. Um, can you speak a little bit to, and this is a bit of a bunny trail, but can you speak a little bit to if you're going to have those priorities where you know,
Mm-hmm.
okay, this is what is important to me? It also means, and I've heard you speak about this, it also means at times you might need to say no to some other good things that
Mm-hmm.
in another season might be something that you would say yes to. How do you discern that, and how do you actually walk that out?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. And it's honestly, I typically like to talk about the word rhythm instead of discipline because
Okay.
discipline feels more rigid and
Yeah.
rhythm can ebb and flow in different seasons.
Hmm.
So there's certain prayer rhythms I have right now that work really well for me
Yeah.
that wouldn't have worked 15 years ago when the twins were born because that
Wow.
was a whole
Yeah.
different season of life.
Hmm.
And so we have to constantly reestablish our rhythms, but the rhythms ebb and flow around some set priorities. Um,
Hmm.
Now, one of the things I have talked a lot about, and is a pretty fundamental part of the book I wrote called "This Dream Is Not for You,"
Yeah.
and the subtitles "Learn to Live by Letting Go,"
Hmm.
and that talks a lot about how sometimes we have a dream for one season of our life.
Hmm.
For me, it was being a worship leader, for being a songwriter, and that's what I did for
Yeah.
20 to 25 years.
You killed it, man. You killed
And
it.
I tried. Um, and that's when we started Elevation and Elevation Worship was growing. I was like, this is my sweet spot. This is what I'm supposed to do. And I defined myself as Wade, the worship leader. Well,
Hmm.
then when Pastor Stephen had a conversation with me saying, hey, I need you to be more of a worship pastor than a worship leader
Hmm.
and take a step back from being front and center on the stage and from,
Yeah.
being in all the songwriting rooms. And I had to have this moment with God of like, well, who am I if I'm not up there leading worship? And even
Wow.
though I taught people on our team, don't get your identity based on what you do, that's exactly what I had done. As
Hmm.
I started to think I was only valuable if I did this one thing. And
Wow.
so leading worship was really good for the season that was my assignment.
Hmm.
But my assignment changed. And I've realized now, looking back years and years later, that if I had held my hands like so tightly on, like, no, I'm only a worship leader, I wouldn't have had my hands open to realize that I love to teach and I love to preach and
Wow.
I loved writing a book. And so there were all these new
Yeah.
things that God had in me and had for me, but it took me letting go of something good that was no longer useful for this season to make room and make space for those things.
Wow. That is so practical, and that's a great example. Thank you for sharing that. Um, I I did know that because, like I said, I followed your journey, so I knew about that switch that you made to going from a lot of the maybe platform, very visible, very seen, to a lot of the man serving in a lot of unseen ways, a lot of ways that
Mhm.
will never get a spotlight. And can you speak to the young leader out there who's up and coming? And it's really easy and it's really desirable to want a spotlight, want attention, want all of that. But can you speak to the heart of a servant behind the scenes, willing to serve in unseen ways, and the faith that that takes, the impact that can have, and the expectation that comes with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's such a real tension.
Yeah.
And it's there's a danger there too, because our culture today, not even just outside the church, I think a lot of this is inside the church. We celebrate the spotlight, we celebrate
Yeah.
what happens on the platform.
Yeah.
And somehow we deem that greater than serving in unseen ways. When if you look at the gospel and you look at Christ, that was about letting go of what the world says is great and what the world says is success, and being willing to lay your life down, um, to take up your cross. And that's not a fun thing. Like
Yeah.
letting go of your letting go of your ego is not a fun thing,
Yeah.
but it's where we actually find life.
Wow.
And so that's not to say that the platform is bad, or because God does, like he has some assignments for people on a platform. He has some assignments for people where they are going to lead worship in an arena. And then someone has an assignment where they're going to lead worship in a church with 10 people.
Yeah.
And in the kingdom of God, neither one is greater than the other. It's all about your faithfulness. And so what I encourage young leaders to do is don't strive for the platform or don't strive for the recognition. Try to multiply what you've been entrusted with where you're at right now. So serve to the best of your ability where you are right now. Maximize the gift that God has in your life right now, and be open to the fact that there might be a different gift for a different season. This might not be the forever gift, the forever dream.
Yeah.
But there's one thing, a very practical thing that's helped me. And it's something that Pastor Stephen taught years and years ago.
Yeah.
And I feel like anytime I'm around a team, I try to teach this because it helped me. And that is, mature ministry is being more excited about what God does through others than what he does through yourself.
Wow.
And so,
wait, say that again, Wade. Say that again.
So mature ministry is being more excited about what God does through others than what he does through yourself.
Wow.
Or does through you.
Wow.
And so if you can learn how to diversify your satisfaction from just what you do to what you can help empower and encourage other people to do, you will bear so much more fruit.
Wow.
As a follower of Jesus.
Wow.
When you can, so for me, when I was going through that change of stepping back from leading worship on the platform, one of the things that helped turn my heart around in the moments where it was difficult is, well, let me see if I can, if I can realize that when John Sal stands on that stage and leads and sings, and I have a hand in encouraging him and pushing him forward, then I can find satisfaction in what he's doing, and I can learn to cheer him on and push him forward.
Wow.
And so I find that when our heart feels like, oh no, this opportunity is slipping away, or you're struggling with jealousy, or you're struggling with feeling like, God, have you forgotten about me? The more I can take my focus off of myself and put it on other people and put it on serving someone else, my heart eventually will follow that.
Wow. So
I think diversify your satisfaction and place it in, how can I help push someone else further in their calling? When Jesus says the last will be first and the first will be last.
Yeah.
I used to feel like, well, what is it? Like, how am I supposed to use my gift and maximize what God's given me, but also make myself last? And what I realized is it wasn't so much about making myself last. It's about pushing other people forward first.
Wow.
And if I can not be trying to run up and take the first spot, and but instead, like, no, I want you to have this opportunity. Then I can trust the Lord with my destiny, that what the Lord has for me. So that's some of what has helped me along the way. So once again, don't villainize influence or impact.
Yeah.
But don't make that your pursuit. Don't strive after that as success. Success in the kingdom of God looks like faithfulness to where you are and where he has you and what he's entrusted into your hands.
Wow.
Steward that well.
Wow, man, that diversify your satisfaction. That's a bar right there. That's a bar. That's good. That's good.
Well, I mean, the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. Yeah. And I'll tell you one more story, and you can cut me off if I'm too long-winded.
No, go for it.
So years after I'd made that transition, and it's crazy. My wife and I were even just talking this morning about how you can feel like you're relearning the same lesson over and over and over again sometimes as a Christian. Now, hopefully you're circling it at a different level. Yeah. But like at the beginning of 2021, we were recording this album at church called Old Church Basement. Yeah. And I remember we were in our Ballantyne location, and I was sitting up at the top, and they were like running rehearsals down at the bottom. And I was watching all these teams, like amazing production teams and worship teams and so on. And they were all just like killing it.
Yeah.
And I had this moment of like, what am I bringing to this? Like,
Hmm.
would it even matter if I was here right now? And it was like a little pity party moment,
Yeah.
which is really
Yeah.
silly, but it was real for me in the moment. And I know all the right answers as a leader, like, oh no, like their success shows you're a leader. I know all that, but it wasn't what I was
Yeah.
feeling in the moment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I felt like the Lord said, well, what you can do is be the biggest encourager in the room.
Wow.
And so that night and then the next day, I was like, okay, I'm going to try to encourage as many people as I can one-on-one.
Mm.
And what I found was that completely changed my heart and my mood and how I saw that
Yeah.
event. But it took me getting outside of my own head and outside of the focus on what I was feeling and putting it on what I could bring to every interaction. So
Wow. Wow.
it's just a practical way that maybe will help somebody.
Well, yeah, I can imagine. I mean, I can't. I haven't been in a room like that, but with the the heavy hitters, if you will. Um, but I mean, I've been in spaces, right, where you look around and you're like, this person's here, this person's here, this person's here. What? Why am I here? And
Mm-hmm.
those thoughts as a leader, they're easy to let slip in, and they're easy to let lead you and take you down mental pathways that are not going to be healthy. But I love, man, that's good to take a step back and say, okay, but Lord, how can you use me uniquely in this situation? It might look different than,
Mm-hmm.
uh, you're probably in the room with Chandler Moore, right? It might look different than what Chandler Moore's doing, but how can I encourage? How can I support? How can I come
Mm-hmm.
alongside of? Um,
Yeah.
I love that. That's good. That's really good. Um,
And even one last thing I'll say on
sure.
that is like God controls what happens with the thing that you are a part of or the thing that you're building or that
Yeah.
you're stewarding. You control what you bring to it. So you
Mm,
control what you bring to it. God controls what he does with it. And
wow.
so steward what you're bringing to it well. Bring your whole heart.
Yeah.
Um, bring a humble heart. Bring a loving heart. Um, and then trust God with what he does with it in the end.
Yeah. I love that. That's really good. You just kind of mentioned humility there. So, can we talk a little bit about the importance as a leader of walking in humility in your leadership?
Mm-hmm.
Because, I mean, you've had the opportunity to be on many platforms, to speak to many people, to influence a lot of teams. But what really stands out about you is you do walk in this humility, and the Lord continues to bless you, right? And He continues to open doors and continues, and it's all glory to Him. But you posture yourself in a humble way before Him. And so, can you speak a little bit about how do you do that whenever you are getting, um, for lack of a better word, attention, right? For whenever you are
Yeah.
getting opportunities and a platform, like that's real. It's really real that
Mm-hmm.
some pride is gonna maybe try to come at you. Some thoughts of look at me, they're real, right? And so how do
Yeah.
you walk in humility, and how do you build that character as a leader, even beyond humility, to stay grounded, to stay firm, and to remember, okay, it's about Him? What's that look like?
Yeah. I mean, that's the struggle of the Christian life is to to model our heart after the heart of Jesus.
Yeah.
Um, who, I mean, you look at Philippians 2, that's such a beautiful picture of humility of Christ forsaking the glory of heaven
Yeah.
and then taking on our likeness
Yeah.
to die a death on the cross. I mean, that is the ultimate picture of humility.
Yeah.
I used to get messed up and tripped up by thinking humility was a personality type.
Hmm.
And what I mean by that is thinking humility is timidness. Humility is always shrinking back. And I actually
Yeah.
think that can be a different form of pride,
Hmm.
insecurity. Because sometimes we shrink back and we call it humility, and it's just insecurity in disguise, which is the
Wow.
flip side of pride. Because pride is self-focused on thinking, "Hey, I deserve this. Look at me."
Hmm.
Insecurity is self-focused because you're just thinking about your weaknesses and you feel like everything depends on you anyway.
Yeah.
Humility for me is my own definition for it.
Yeah.
Is it's a focused confidence on God.
Hmm.
So where I think the truly humble people are trying their best to keep their heart focused on serving the Lord, loving the Lord, serving other people,
Yeah.
and being willing to obey him no matter what that looks like. And that
Yeah.
obedience might be, hey, I want you to stand on that stage in front of those people.
Yeah.
And I know you don't feel worthy and I know you don't feel qualified, but I want you to get up there and I want you to say what I've asked you to say.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that humility might look like, I want you to keep your mouth shut and I
Yeah.
want you to serve in this job that you hate, but I want you to like show what it looks like to be a great worker with a great work ethic, with a great attitude.
Wow.
So I think it's living out the gospel. It's living out the heart of Jesus and the way of Jesus
Yeah.
in the sphere that you've been assigned in that moment.
Yeah.
And so that's why humility can look so different. And we're so quick in our culture to label someone as humble or not humble, when somebody that is extremely confident in God and they're bold and stepping out, it might look arrogant to you and they might be the most humble person ever because they feel uncomfortable doing that, but they're doing their best to follow Jesus.
Wow.
And somebody that looks humble to you might actually be the most self-focused person because all they're thinking about is, well, I can't do what God's called me to do because of this, and this. And therefore there's,
Wow.
I mean, that was the Moses problem at first. He gave all these different excuses why he couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And what he was doing is he was pre-rejecting himself and calling it humility. And it wasn't humility at all. It was a lack of faith.
Wow.
So I think what I am learning, because I am more of a timid, quiet, shy person. And my struggle in this season in humility is learning how to be more bold. And so being like, okay, I'm not gonna, because the fear of man will keep you from humility too. What are they going to think about what I'm going to say?
Wow.
Will they judge me? Will they not like me? So I'm having to cling to Galatians 1:10.
Wow.
Where it says, it just escaped me. Am I still trying to please human beings, or am I trying to please Christ? If I was not trying to please Christ, what is it?
It
I
says,
just memorized it
am
with
I
my
now
family.
seeking the approval of man or of God, or am I trying to please man?
I'm trying to please people.
Yeah.
Please people. If I was still trying to please people, I'd not be a servant of Christ. Yes.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to hold on to that and realize that if I'm trying to please or live up to someone else's expectations of me, rather than God's, that's not humility. Humility is saying, okay, I'm going to actually take this step. I'm going to take this risk. It was hard for me to leave Elevation because, like, what are people going to think about me? What is this? But I felt like the Lord is like, are you going to trust me to write the rest of your story, or do you just want to play it safe?
Wow.
So
wow, man.
There's a lot in there about humility, but it's something that I'm really trying to wrestle with right now and realize that boldness and humility should go hand in hand.
Yeah. I oftentimes have said, like, if I could boil it down, and I'd be curious to see if in a very simple form you would agree with this. Arrogance is look at me. Confidence is look at God. And confidence is look at God and he uses us. So it's not putting yourself down. It's not saying, oh, I bring nothing to the table. And it's not downplaying yourself. It's really just saying no, but he's the source of the gift. He's the source of the ability. And so I don't have anything to brag about, but I'll step out in it and I'll be bold in it because it's from him, not from me. Would you agree with that?
Yeah. I mean, that's the definition. Basically, I said earlier is that humility is a focused confidence on God.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I'm right. I 100% agree there. And that's why I don't think someone was asking me the other day, like, when am I going to stop struggling with pride and wanting people to admit? I was like, I don't think you will on this side of eternity.
Yeah.
But I think humility helps us pivot away from pride quicker and name it and recognize it. So for me, even like before I get on a podcast like this, there's the part of me that's like, oh, I want to be impressive. I want to say something smart. I want to whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And what I'll do is I'll just pray like, okay, God, ultimately, I want to say what you want me to say. I want to be helpful rather than impressive.
Wow.
You know all the stuff that's in there that is selfish ambition. I name it. I surrender it to you. Help me to lead the way and speak the way you would have me to. And
Wow.
so like whether I'm going on stage to preach or do something like this, I try to at least name what's in my heart, bring it to God and say, God, you can handle my mess as long as my
Yeah.
heart's bringing it to you. And so I think
Yeah.
humility is bringing God the mess of your heart, not pretending that it doesn't exist.
Mm. Oh, wow. There it is, Wade. There it is. That's so good. That
Hmm.
is so good. Bringing God the mess of the heart. Wow, wow. That's it. You've mentioned a couple times throughout this conversation about um the step, which by the way you mentioned. I mean, you still attend Elevation. You're still a part. But it was a step of faith to step into
Mm-hmm.
something new and to step into leaving a position that you served in faithfully for, what'd you say, 18 years?
14 years.
14 years.
I was married. I've been married for 18
Been
years.
married
That's the
18.
18.
Yep.
Yeah.
Serving there, part of staff for that amount of time. The faith that it takes to step into something new. Because I feel like it can be easy for especially young people to feel like, okay, they have this dream, they have this thing in their heart that the Lord's put there, but it can be intimidating and it can be
Mm-hmm.
scary and it can be like, either what are people going to think or how is this going to work out? But can you speak a little bit to people who may be in that situation? How do you step out in faith and what God has called you to, right? Not just anything,
Mm-hmm.
not something dumb, but how do you use discernment, but also walk in that boldness to step out into something that does require a lot
Yeah.
of faith?
It's a good question. I think number one, I'll say this. A lot of times we celebrate people who step out in faith when we should equally celebrate people that stay in faith. And so
Hmm.
sometimes it can be really easy to run from something that's hard.
Wow.
And I think that honestly, the world says, well, when something gets hard, go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And you're always chasing this fleeting sense of fulfillment rather than staying faithful where you are. And so I think there's a lot of people that their greatest testimony may be staying at that job and being a light and being a witness there if God calls you to
Wow.
stay.
Wow.
Um, and because there were seasons in the 14 years that I was on staff where things were hard, things were difficult, and
Yeah.
there was the piece of me that's like, well, you should just go find something that's easier. It's like, but
Yeah.
no, the Lord wanted me for that season to stay. I believed in the mission. I wanted and at the end of the day, I knew God, his assignment for me wasn't done.
Hmm.
Um, and so then when it came back around to the beginning of 2021, when my wife and I, because we honestly thought we were going to stay at Elevation till the end. We'd
Yeah.
kind of written the rest of our story.
Yeah.
Um, and that's where we felt like the Lord started to put this restlessness on both of our hearts of, hey, have you written the rest of your story? Are you willing to trust me with the pen? And
Wow.
we committed to pray because it was such a big, like we loved the church so much. It was a big deal for our family. We prayed about it for almost a year.
Wow.
And the Lord spoke a lot of prophetic words to us over that year. But I was still wrestling with it. And I was struggling with a lot of what we talked about, the fear of man, like not wanting to disappoint
Yeah.
Pastor Stephen or the team and all this stuff that God was having to
Sure.
work out in me, or
Sure.
even like the ego of, are you willing to walk away from something that's, has a lot of influence? Like you'll be like, the enemy would say, well, you're not going to be significant anymore if you step away from this.
Hmm.
So there was a lot of lies that I had to
Wow.
work through. But it was in the fall of 2021. It was on an Elevation Nights tour stop where I felt like the Lord said, your assignment's done. I've got something else for you to do. And I've got someone else to take this where like you're not able to take it.
Wow.
So a lot of times stepping out in faith isn't just about you. It's about the people that are going to fill the void that you leave and like
Hmm.
creating space for someone else to step into their gifting.
Wow.
But it was still scary. And here's the thing I would encourage people with.
Yeah.
I think we grow up in church hearing, well, you've just got to get a peace about something before you do it. And I understand the sentiment of that. And I do think there was a level of supernatural peace that I did feel like, oh, this God did speak.
Yeah.
However, it did not take the pit out of my stomach of like, oh gosh, what if we make the wrong decision? This terrifies me. I'm so scared to have the conversation and actually do it.
Yeah.
And I found that the peace, the deep peace came after we obeyed. It came after we
Mm.
had the conversation.
Wow.
And so sometimes I think we delay obedience and we blame it on not having a peace when we're just afraid to get uncomfortable and take the risk and trust God.
Wow. Wow.
And so sometimes, a lot of times in my life, the peace comes after you obey. Now, you need to do your
Mm.
due diligence of seeking the Lord, seeking counsel, being in
Yeah.
his word, fasting, praying, all that stuff. But when you feel like God's spoken, and for me, that's like I'm 75, maybe 80% sure it was God. But there's
Yeah.
always that 20% of like,
Sure.
I could be making the biggest mistake ever.
Yeah.
Because I don't think any of us ever reached that 100% level.
Yeah.
But when I get to that like 80% and it's being confirmed in different ways, even if I still have that like pit in my stomach, it's time to step out and trust that the Lord is going to work it out. And I find that the peace does come in the long run as you obey, as you follow Jesus. I mean, there's so many scriptures about God guiding our steps,
Mm-hmm.
so many Psalms about that. But to me, I find that the guidance happens as I'm taking a step, not as I'm
Yeah.
waiting and shrinking back. And I think God's big enough to where if you take the wrong step and you're really trying to seek him, he's not trying to trick you. He's going
Mm-hmm.
to get you where he wants you to go.
Yeah.
The Lord is a rewarder of those who seek him.
Yeah.
And so I think if we are doing our best to follow him, he's got us, even if we make a mistake. But that's why the decisions that have bigger ramifications require more intense prayer, fasting, counsel, all of those things.
Wow. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. I love
so
that.
yeah,
I love that. It's applying that wisdom to say, I'm going to seek the Lord. I'm going to seek him through everything you said, prayer, fasting, counsel, his word, right? Like all those things, while at the same time, at some point, realizing you got to move. And
mm-hmm.
oftentimes, no answer is an answer, and it may not be the right one, right? And so,
Yeah,
understanding it might be best to, after so long, if you're like, you don't, I love that you said that. You don't need to be 100% sure. Man, if you pray on it and you're honestly, like, if you're seeking God with a pure heart, his motive is not to lead you down a bad path. So if you're like,
yeah,
man, I've sought the Lord and I think 51% is like, I should do this. Okay.
yeah.
You gotta move, you gotta do stuff. I think that's really cool. And it's certainly, I mean, my goodness, something that you've had to experience and live into and live out in the past, um, what couple of years as you've sought him, as you've done this thing. Um,
I mean, even this morning, I mentioned that my wife and I had this conversation about struggling with something over and over again.
yeah,
We were having the same conversation of like, there's something that we've stepped into recently, and it hasn't gone exactly the way we thought it would, and we were like, we thought this was God. Was it really God?
yeah, yeah.
And but I think that's like the wrestle can be the why sometimes. Like wrestling with God
Mm,
keeps us close to God, keeps us
yeah,
seeking Him.
yeah,
Um, and I find too that one thing that really helps people, has helped me a lot, is just learning how to be still and be silent
mm,
and really listen for God and not drown it out with distraction after distraction.
yeah,
Sometimes I'd been afraid to be silent in the past because I wasn't excited about what might rise to the surface if I finally like stopped and was still before God. Like, what am I
yeah,
going to actually have to deal with about myself?
yeah. Been there.
Yeah. So I think that's a big piece of the discernment process too, of learning how to be still and just listen to God.
Wow, that's good. Which in today's society is no small task because
Yeah.
we're bombarded 24/7.
All the
But
time.
yeah, setting some things aside, hearing the voice of God, man, Wade, that's so good. If you had to give, as we just kind of wrap up here, I mean, you can share whatever. Um, I obviously want to honor your time. So as we wrap up here, like, for any young leader who might be listening to this, maybe a 14-year-old, maybe a 24-year-old, they've got dreams, they've got passions, they're drawn near to the Lord. What is one piece of advice, or a couple, you can give a couple, but if you had to if you had to give like a succinct, like, here's what I would recommend whenever it comes to leadership advice, what would that be?
Pursue Jesus more than you pursue your dream. We are great at chasing after dreams and chasing after goals. We as a society, I do at least, can struggle prioritizing, like really just placing Jesus at the center of everything.
Wow.
I think if we really love the presence of God and prayer and his word and his people, and honoring him and serving him in what he has for us in this season and this assignment, I think the boldness to step out into different dreams, the clarity to hear his voice, all of it would work itself out a bit more than it does when we tend to try to manipulate it and make it happen on our own.
Yeah.
I talk a lot in the book about the difference between the striving self and the surrendered self. And I find that my default mode is just trying to strive to make things happen, because at the core, I don't believe God's going to make it happen, or what God will make happen is good for me. So when I get my heart right and really surrender and trust him, and I have to pivot from striving to surrender multiple times a day, but the more I can get my heart into that surrendered posture, and the quicker I can do it, and the more it becomes my natural rhythm, the more my heart is in tune to the dreams that God has. So I think, if I'm talking to a young leader, number one, your drive and your passion is a gift. Like the body of Christ needs the energy of youth with the wisdom of experience. And that's why that's why we need generations working together. And so that boldness that you have, that drive, that fire, that's a gift from God.
Yeah.
Channel it more than anything else into knowing the Lord.
Wow.
And still like grow your skills, learn, try things, but man, more than anything else, love Jesus, walk with Jesus. And I think when you seek him first, everything else will be added.
Come on, dude, that's so good. Thank you so much for sharing that. Can you, as we wrap up here, tell people a little bit about the book?
Oh yeah. It's, This Dream Is Not For You.
Come on.
And it tells the story. Well, first of all, it's centered on the biblical narrative of David. And, David's a man after God's own heart, not perfect by any means, but he has this dream to build the temple, which seems like an amazing dream, a noble dream, a God dream.
Yeah.
And then Nathan, the prophet, comes to him and says, this dream is not for you. This is for your son, Solomon. And so we see David have this dream is not for you moment. And so I walk in the book through like, how did David move from wanting to be the one to carry out that dream and to live in it, then to be the one who helped resource his son to do it.
Wow.
And that passage, that scripture, is actually what I read the night I had my first conversation with Pastor Stephen about, when he was like, the future I see for you isn't what you probably see for yourself here. And it was the scripture that God used to say, hey, I'm with you in this. This decision is from me. And so you trust me. And so I talk about also like my, raising daughters with special needs, and basically how in American culture, Western culture, we have idolized our dreams, and we take anything that we want to do and we turn it into our calling, and we turn it into our purpose.
Wow.
When a dream was never meant to carry that weight. Your purpose and your calling are something so much bigger than your dreams. Your dreams might be one vehicle that you can live out your purpose. But like I said, you might get in a bunch of different vehicles throughout your life, but your purpose stays the same.
Yeah.
And so how do you, the book talks about how do you hold your dreams loosely as a disciple of Jesus in a way that causes you to actually have greater expectation, greater faith, to dream more, but to not be defined by your dream and to not be crushed when a dream doesn't happen.
Wow.
Because we've all lived long enough to know that not every dream you have is gonna be your reality. Some will,
Yeah.
some won't. And
Yeah.
so how do we actually be dreamers and disciples and hold them together in tension?
Wow. I love that so much. Where can people order it?
Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the places.
You're everywhere. You're a big deal, Wade. You're a big deal.
It might not be everywhere, but you can at least get it online everywhere.
There we go. What is the best way for people to stay up to date with what you're doing? Yeah.
Yeah. WadeJoye.com, and put an E on the joy. People forget that sometimes. So Joye.
Yeah.
I'm pretty active on Instagram at Wade Joye. And then I also have a podcast and YouTube channel, but the podcast is called Dreamers and Disciples.
I love that so much. Man, you have just poured out so much wisdom in this conversation.
Oh man, you asked great questions.
Well, thanks so much. And thanks so much for your time and for your willingness. And yeah, for everybody listening to this, I'll put the links down below to the book, to your website and your Instagram. So be sure to follow. That book will be well worth your time. And so check that out. And yeah, Wade, thank you so much. It was such an honor to have you on. It's such an honor to have this conversation.
Thanks, Brandon.
All right, everybody. We love you so much. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we will see you back here next time.